So with express consent, there are a couple of ways that you can get express consent from a recipient. So first, if you were to say yes to receiving a CEM, whether it's an in-person meeting or through a telephone conversation, those are acceptable as express consent. Also, if you have a form on a website where you're asking people to sign up and you're asking them to basically check a box to agree to sending or receiving information via email, that's also acceptable. So you need to have a checkbox. It's important to note that before July 1st, some organizations may have bundled multiple items in checkboxes, essentially saying, I agree to receive communications from you, and I also want to receive my 40% discount. You can no longer do that after July 1st. You can only put one item in that the recipient is agreeing to, explicitly as it relates to receiving CEMs. Also, you must add specific disclosure to your sign-up form when you're seeking express consent. So when you have a form on a website, you must add some prescribed text that the CRTC is requiring, such as that the recipient can withdraw their consent at any time. Okay, so we talked a little bit about express consent. There's also implied consent. And as I mentioned before, implied consent is when you can reasonably assume that the recipient would be fine with receiving your communications. And so the CASL regulations set out a couple of examples around essentially cases of implied consent. So the first is having contact details published in a conspicuous place or disclosed on a business card. So if you find somebody's email address on a website or you get their business card, as long as there's no text saying do not send me any communications, then you can use that electronic email address to send a message to that person on an implied consent basis. Secondly, when you send the message under implied consent, it must relate to the person's functions or duties with that business. So if you're messaging somebody as it relates to their duties, it's fine, but if you send them something that's completely unrelated, then that would be considered offside in terms of CASL regulation. And another case of implied consent relates to an existing business relationship. And so if you have an existing business relationship, then there's implied consent in place. The example I would use around an existing business relationship would be if you have a client who's paying for a monthly service or has a contract for you, then you're essentially you have an exemption. However, if the transaction, if it was a one-time transaction and they haven't done any more business with you, then you have basically a 2-year window from that transaction to which you can continue to message that that recipient on an implied basis. Before that 2 years is up, the client or the person must either make another transaction with you, or you can convert them to another consent type, whether it's an express consent through basically where they said that they agreed to receive future communications from you.